Hi Guy, welcome back TV spoilers. Something terrible is happening when Tracy discovers Diane and Matt's secret escape. She warns Jack that he may be in danger. Jack did not arrive at suspicion the way he arrived at most decisions in his life. With a measured breath and a neat column of pros and cons. This one seeped in through the cracks of ordinary days. The kind that should have felt safe in the Abbott house, coffee cooling on the counter. Familiar footsteps on polished floors. The steady rhythm of a family that had survived too many storms to be rattled by anything as simple as a few late nights. At first it was only a mild dissonance. A sense that Diane's attention no longer fully belonged to the room she was standing in. Her eyes drifted when Kyle spoke about Harrison's schedule. Her smile arrived a second too late when Jack tried to lighten the mood. She began holding her phone differently, screen turned inward. Thumb hovering as if every notification carried a private emergency. Jack told himself it was stress. Or the lingering residue of old conflicts that never truly vanished in Genoa City. He told himself that love, when chosen, required a certain generosity of interpretation. But Jack had also learned through business betrayals, family fractures, and the kind of heartbreak that leaves permanent marks that denial can be a soft trap. It feels like loyalty until the moment it becomes negligence. And Jack could not afford negligence where his family's safety was concerned. The first time he noticed the disappearances, he did not call them that. They were absences with plausible wrappers, errands that took longer than expected. A sudden need to clear her head. A vague appointment she mentioned only after it had already passed. Diane had always been complicated, always capable of balancing sincerity with calculation. And Jack had married her with open eyes precisely because he believed he understood the difference between a flawed woman trying to be better and a woman slipping back into the shadows that once defined her. Yet the pattern sharpened. Her phone rang and she stepped away too quickly. She ended conversations the moment Jack entered a room, voice dropping into that careful, neutral register that could mean nothing or everything. Sometimes she returned with an expression that was too composed, as if she had rehearsed calm in the mirror before rejoining him. Jack watched these details pile up like quiet invoices demanding to be paid. He hated himself for counting them. He hated the way it made him feel like a man regressing into paranoia. But he hated even more the possibility that his instinct was right, because if he was right, it would mean the life he was trying to protect had already been invited into danger. Without his consent, Jack's unease became something heavier the day he heard her on the phone. When she thought she was alone, it was not the content caught, only fragments. A few words that could have belonged to any conversation bit the tone. Diane's voice carried urgency, restrained but unmistakable. A controlled intensity that did not match the small talk she offered at dinner. Jack stood in the hallway long enough to feel the discomfort settle into his ribs. When she ended the call, she came out with a practiced ease, asking him something ordinary, as if the air hadn't just shifted. Jack answered, smiled, did what he always did when he sensed a threat but lacked proof. He filed the moment away and waited. Waiting was something Jack Abbott understood intimately. He had waited for companies to recover, for people to forgive, for love to return. But waiting for clarity in a marriage felt different. It wasn't strategic, it was survival. He tried, at first, to approach the subject gently. Not confrontation, wasn't ready for that. Not without knowing whether he was about to accuse the woman he loved of nothing more than private stress. He offered Diane small openings, checking in, asking if something was weighing on her, reminding her that whatever it was, they could face it together. Diane responded with reassurance that sounded correct rather than true. She insisted she was fine. She spoke about needing space, about being overwhelmed, about handling something personal. The words were reasonable, even familiar, yet Jack felt an invisible barrier rising between them. One built from carefully chosen phrases and half-truths. He recognized that barrier. He had built similar ones himself when he was trying to contain a crisis, protect people, or keep a secret long enough to control the fallout. That recognition was what finally nudged him from concern into action. Diane wasn't simply distracted. She was managing something and she didn't want him inside it. Jack's decision to investigate did not come with pride. It came with a sickening guilt. The kind that makes a man stare at his reflection longer than usual and wonder when love became a reason to spy. He told himself he was protecting Kyle and Harrison, that he would never forgive himself if he ignored warning signs and paid for it later. He told himself that truth, once found, would either relieve him or at least give him a path forward. Still, the first time he followed Diane, He felt like he was crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. He kept distance. He moved with the quiet caution of a man trained by years of corporate wars and family vendettas. Diane drove with purpose, not the wandering route of someone running errands. Jack stayed back, far enough not to be noticed, close enough not to lose her. His heart thumped with a rhythm that did not match the speed of his car. He wasn't chasing a business rival. He was chasing his own wife, and the realization made him feel both foolish and afraid. When Diane parked and stepped out, Jack's breath caught. She was not meeting a friend. She was not strolling into a familiar shop. She moved with the posture of someone heading toward an appointment she had not wanted to make. Shoulders slightly rigid, chin lifted in defiance or determination. Jack watched from a distance as she approached a figure whose face he could not clearly see. The meeting was brief, but briefness can be its own kind of statement. There was no warmth, no lingering. They spoke closely, discreetly. Diane handed something over, received something. Jack couldn't tell. What he could tell was that Diane looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, pretending she wasn't afraid of the fall. When the figure left, Diane stayed behind a moment as if steadying herself, then returned to her car. Jack sat frozen, mind racing through possibilities. He had promised himself he wouldn't jump to conclusions without proof, but his instincts shouted that this was not harmless. The proof did not arrive all at once. It came the way disasters often do, piece by piece, each new fragment transforming the old ones into something uglier. Jack started noticing details he had dismissed before, names on documents Diane moved too quickly to hide, numbers scribbled on a notepad and torn away. The faint strain in her voice when Kyle mentioned family security. He did not want to search her things, but the fear for Kyle and Harrison gnawed at him until his restraint felt irresponsible. The night he finally looked, he didn't do it in anger, he did it in dread. His hands were steady, but his stomach churned. He felt like he was walking into a room where he might find either nothing at all, or the end of everything he had been trying to build. What he found was not an affair. Not the cliché betrayal that would have hurt, but at least fit into familiar human weakness. It was worse, because it wasn't about Diane's personal longing, it was about danger. Evidence of secret communications surfaced first, call logs. Messages that weren't romantic but coded in their brevity. The kind of exchanges meant to coordinate rather than confess. Then financial records transfers, small enough not to trigger immediate alarm, yet consistent enough to form a clear line. Jack stared at the numbers until they blurred. Money moving in the dark always meant intent. People didn't shuffle funds quietly unless they were building something they didn't want seen. And then the name surfaced, unmistakable and chilling. The kind that instantly changes the temperature of the room even when it's written on paper. Matt Clark. Jack felt the world narrow. For a moment he couldn't hear anything but his own breathing, rough and disbelieving. Matt Clark was not a misunderstanding. Matt Clark was not a bad choice that could be excused by stress or misguided compassion. Matt Clark represented threatened enemy capable of reaching into their lives with the kind of malice that didn't stop at intimidation. Jack's mind went immediately to Kyle, to Harrison, to the vulnerable points in their family routine, school, the park, the places that were supposed to be safe. Jack's protective instincts surged so violently it was almost physical, as if his body wanted to become a shield. He tried to tell himself there had to be another explanation. But the transfers, the meetings, the secrecy combined. They formed a picture that was difficult to soften. Diane was involved. Diane was helping. And if Diane was helping, then the danger wasn't outside the house. It was already inside. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dim quiet with the evidence spread out like a crime scene, feeling grief rise in him alongside fury. It was a complicated fury, not just rage at betrayal, but rage at the cruelty of being forced into this position again, first to question whether the people he loved could ever truly choose the family over their own tangled histories. Jack had fought for Diane. He had defended her against suspicion, against judgment, against the collective memory of everything she had been. He had asked Kyle to believe in her, to give her space to prove she had changed. And now the very thing Jack had feared, nightmare of trusting the wrong version of Diane, was unfolding in his hands. The pain was not sharp, it was crushing. The kind that presses down until a man wonders if he can breathe beneath it. Yet even in that pain, Jack remained Jack. He did not rush to explode. He did not storm into Diane's room like a stranger demanding answers. He thought first of consequences. If he confronted her without strategy, she could deny, destroy evidence, or accelerate whatever plan she was involved in. If he confronted her too late, the plan could already be in motion. Jack weighed time the way he weighed risk in business. Every hour mattered. Every move needed to be deliberate. But this was not a boardroom. This was his marriage, and the stakes were his son and grandson. The realization sharpened his fear into something colder and more determined. He would confront Diane, but he would do it when he could not be manipulated, when he could not be gaslighted into doubting what he knew. He owed himself that much. He owed Kyle and Harrison far more. The confrontation happened not with screaming, but with a devastating calm. Jack waited until the house was quiet enough that nothing could blur the moment. Until the kind of silence settled that makes every word heavier. When Diane entered the room, she sensed immediately that something was different. Jack didn't need to accuse first, his posture did it for him. He placed the evidence where she could see it without touching it. Diane's eyes flicked down and widened, then narrowed as if she was searching for the right mask. Jack watched the transition and felt another layer of heartbreak peel away. A woman who was innocent would have been startled and confused. Diane looked caught. Jack asked for an explanation, and he asked it like a man begging not to have his heart destroyed. He did not frame it as a debate. He did not offer her easy exits. He demanded truth not because he wanted to punish her, but because he could not protect his family without knowing exactly what kind of danger they were in. Diane tried first to control the narrative, to shape the conversation into something manageable. She offered justifications that hovered at the edge of logic, that she was handling something, that she had reasons, that she was doing what she thought was necessary. But the more she spoke, the more Jack heard the familiar rhythm of a lie being built in real time. The details didn't land. The explanation shifted. She reached for emotion, insisting she loved him, insisting she would never intentionally harm the family, yet she could not explain why secrecy had been her first choice, or why money had moved toward an enemy. Jack's pain deepened because he could feel her trying to salvage the marriage, without surrendering the whole truth. And a partial truth in a situation like this was simply another weapon. As Diane struggled to justify herself, Jack's mind kept circling back to one point: she had made decisions that put Kyle and Harrison at risk. That single fact eclipsed everything else. Love could endure many things. Jack had forgiven betrayals in the past, had rebuilt after devastation, had swallowed pride and rage when he believed a person's remorse was real, and their change was possible. But risking a child's safety was a line that altered the nature of a relationship. Jack's fear for Kyle had always been a steady presence in his life. Ever since Kyle was young, fear of bad influences, of heartbreak, of the kind of trouble that finds Abbott's sons as inevitably as gravity. Now that fear expanded to include Harrison, a boy who carried innocence like a fragile, precious thing. Jack realized in that moment that he could not afford to gamble with forgiveness. Still, the decision tearing through him wasn't simple. Ending a marriage was not a clean solution, it was a blast radius. It would wound Kyle, even if Kyle was angry at Diane. It would destabilize the home Harrison relied on. It would invite public scrutiny, the kind that could attract exactly the wrong attention at exactly the wrong time. Jack understood how quickly a family crisis could become a beacon for enemies. Yet pretending this was manageable would be worse. If Diane remained tied to Matt Clark in any way throughout obligation, guilt, fear, or some misguided plan, then Jack could not trust that their home was secure. Trust was not a romantic ideal to Jack, it was infrastructure. Without it, everything collapsed. Jack looked at Diane and saw not only his wife, but the woman he had believed he could finally build peace with. He remembered moments that had felt real, shared laughter, quiet mornings. The way Diane had seemed determined to earn her place in the Abbott legacy rather than steal it. Jack wondered, with a kind of nauseating sorrow, whether those moments had been genuine or merely convenient. He hated that he was questioning her entire identity, because it meant the betrayal had already contaminated his memories. Diane's presence in the family had always been controversial, always precarious. And Jack had fought so hard to normalize it, to make it stable, to make it safe. Now he was facing the possibility that the stability had been a facade built on his hope. The more Jack pressed, the more Diane's defenses rose. She tried to frame Jack's reaction as overreaction, as a failure to understand her motivations. But Jack understood something Diane either forgot or underestimated. He had been patient when patience was warranted. He had been kind when kindness could heal. Now, patience felt like an invitation to catastrophe. Jack's voice stayed controlled, but the control was not gentleness. It was restraint born of survival. He told Diane, in essence, that her actions had moved beyond the realm of marital conflict and into the realm of threat. He made it clear that whatever she believed she was doing, she had done it in a way that stripped him of choice and placed his family in the crosshairs. That was not love. That was not partnership. That was a kind of selfishness Jack could not rationalize away. As the confrontation stretched, the emotional temperature shifted from accusation to mourning. Jack felt something inside him cracking, not in a dramatic burst, but in a slow, steady fracture. He realized he was grieving the marriage even as he stood inside it. Diane's attempts to justify herself became background noise to Jack's deeper realization. The person he needed Diane to be in order for this marriage to survive, transparent, loyal, protective, was not the person standing in front of him. And Jack could not force Diane into that shape by loving her harder. Kyle and Harrison's name sat in Jack's throat like stones. He didn't need to bring them into the room to feel their presence. Every decision Jack made as a father and grandfather was guided by the question of, what would keep them safe? What would keep them emotionally intact? What would prevent the kind of trauma that echoes for decades? Jack's fear wasn't abstract. It had weight, texture, vivid images that kept intruding. Someone watching Harrison from a distance. Someone using the chaos of adult mistakes to reach a child. Jack despised the fact that his mind could go there, but he also knew that in Genoa City, it wasn't paranoia, it was awareness. Enemies didn't fight fair. And Matt Clark, by definition, was not a problem to be managed, he was a threat to be neutralized. Jack's choice began to solidify, not because he wanted to punish Diane, but because he could no longer justify keeping her close. A marriage is supposed to be a shelter. If Diane's presence made the shelter porous, then Jack had a duty to reinforce the walls, even if it meant tearing part of the house down. The thought made him feel hollow. He had wanted so badly to believe in redemption, not as a fairy tale, but as something to flawed adults could build through honesty and accountability. Diane had always insisted she wanted that too. And yet she had chosen secrecy, chosen a dangerous connection, chosen to gamble with consequences Jack never would have accepted. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Jack moved through the house like a man carrying a silent alarm. He kept his demeanor controlled for the sake of the family, but inside, his thoughts were loud and relentless. Every creak of the floorboards made him tense. Every time Harrison laughed, Jack felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it bordered on panic. Jack watched Kyle more closely, measuring Kyle's mood, searching for signs that Kyle sensed something wrong. Jack hated the duplicity of hiding the full truth while also preparing for what might come. But he also understood that dragging Kyle into the immediate chaos before Jack had a plan would only increase vulnerability. The impulse to protect sometimes demands loneliness. Jack had lived that truth many times, but never had it felt so personal, so intertwined with love. Diane, meanwhile, tried to regain control in it by revealing more truth, but by trying to soften Jack's resolve. She hovered at the edges of conversation, attempted to restore intimacy through routine, offered reassurances that sounded increasingly desperate. Jack felt a flash of compassion despite everything because he could see Diane feared losing him. But fear was not enough. Fear did not undo a money transfer. Fear did not erase secret meetings. Fear did not guarantee that Matt Clark was no longer part of their lives. Jack needed certainty, and Diane was not giving it. Her resistance to full transparency became its own confession. Jack began to consider what ending the marriage would actually entail. He wasn't naive, he knew Diane would not simply disappear. Diane was entwined with the family now, with history, with Kyle's complicated emotions, with the kind of bonds that don't snap cleanly. And if Diane was truly involved in a plan to rescue Matt Clark, then the fallout could be immediate. Jack understood that separating from Diane might trigger desperation, and desperation could push her into even riskier moves. That thought made Jack's decision feel like walking through a corridor lined with traps. But not deciding was also a trap. Keeping Diane close while doubting her was unsustainable. A marriage cannot thrive under surveillance. A family cannot be safe under uncertainty. Jack's internal conflict sharpened into a brutal clarity. He might have to end the marriage, not only to protect the family from Diane's choices, but to force the truth into the open. People hide best when they feel secure. If Diane felt her life with Jack slipping away, she might finally reveal what she had been trying to manage alone. That was a cold way to think about a marriage, and Jack hated himself for it. But he could not pretend emotion alone would solve this. Love did not disarm an enemy. Strategy did. And yet, beneath the strategy, Jack was bleeding. The betrayal wasn't just about danger, it was about humiliation. Jack had defended Diane publicly and privately. He had built a narrative of trust around her, convincing not only others but himself that this time was different. Now he faced the possibility that he had been manipulated, that his desire for stability had been used against him. That humiliation turned into anger, not explosive anger, but a hard, simmering one that made Jack's resolve steady. He would not let his hope become a weapon that endangered his family again. If Diane wanted to prove she deserved the Abbott name, she had to do it with truth, not with secret deals in the dark. As the days narrowed toward a decision, Jack's fear for Kyle and Harrison remained the constant drumbeat. He thought about Kyle's tendency to act impulsively when hurt, about how quickly Kyle could turn pain into action that might escalate a situation. Jack thought about Harrison's innocence. about how children sense tension even when adults try to hide it. Jack's protective instincts urged him to move quickly, to create distance, to lock doors both literal and emotional. But Jack's heart hesitated because he knew the moment he formally stepped away from Diane, nothing would ever return to the way it was. The Abbott family could endure many things, but the corrosion of trust inside the home changed people permanently. Jack felt like he was standing at a crossroads where every direction led to loss. On the night Jack finally began to accept what he had to do, he sat alone and listened to the house. He heard the subtle sounds of family life, the kind of ordinary noise that makes a home feel alive. And he felt a sudden, fierce grief for the simplicity he could never reclaim. He had wanted peace. He had wanted to be done with plots and enemies and betrayals. He had wanted Harrison to grow up in a world where the worst danger was a scraped knee. Instead, Jack was once again calculating risk, measuring threats, preparing for a fight he never asked for. And the cruelest part was that the fight might be against the woman he had chosen to love. Jack's final thoughts before he rose to take action were not about revenge or pride. They were about responsibility. Kyle trusted him to be steady. Harrison depended on him to be safe. Jack realized that he could survive heartbreak. He had survived it before. What he could not survive was failing them because he wanted to believe in a version of Diane that might no longer exist. He drew a breath that felt like swallowing fire and told himself that protecting his family was not betrayal, it was love in its most painful form. When Jack moved toward Diane's door, his steps were quiet but decisive. He wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to beg. He was going to make a choice that would change the shape of their lives. Because the evidence had already changed the truth. And as he reached for the handle, one terrifying possibility slammed into him with the force of a final warning. If Diane had been planning to rescue Matt Clark, then she hadn't just been hiding the plan from Jack, she might have been waiting for the exact moment. Jack decided to leave her. Because that moment could be the trigger that sets everything into motion, and somewhere in the dark, beyond the Abbott walls, Matt Clark might already be closer than Jack realized. On our TV Spoilers channel, I'm always looking for content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting insights. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.